The new cleaner at the Millionaire's company is beautiful and he falls in love with her. The September morning sun filtered through the windows of the 70th floor of the Callum Tower in Chicago, illuminating the imposing figure of Callum Richardson as he looked out over the city below. At 35, he had built an empire from scratch, transforming a small startup into one of the largest technology companies in the country. His reflection in the armored glass revealed a man with striking features, meticulously groomed dark hair, and an Italian suit that cost more than the annual salary of many of his employees. The silence of the office was interrupted by the soft sound of knocks on the door. "Come in," his deep, controlled voice echoed through the minimalist environment. "Mr. Richardson, the new cleaning team has arrived for initial training," informed Madison, his executive assistant for 5 years, consulting her tablet. "HR request your presence for the official welcome." Callum suppressed a sigh of irritation. Normally, he would delegate this function to a manager, but after the scandal of the previous month when he uncovered an embezzlement scheme in the maintenance department, he decided to personally oversee all new hires. "I'll be there in 5 minutes," he replied, adjusting his navy blue tie in front of the mirror. On the 10th floor, where the Human Resources Department was located, Arden Martinez was waiting with 5 other new employees. Unlike the others, who showed obvious nervousness, she maintained a serene, almost defiant posture. At 28, Arden's dark brown eyes bore the determination of someone who knew life's difficulties well. When Callum entered the training room, the air seemed to change. His presence caused an immediate silence, except for Arden, who continued organizing his notes as calmly as before. This small act of indifference did not go unnoticed by him. "Good morning, everyone," began Callum, his voice filling the room. "Welcome to Richardson Tech. Our company values excellence at every level, and that includes every function, without exception." His eyes roamed the group, stopping momentarily on Arden. She held his gaze with a mixture of professional respect and subtle resistance that intrigued him. During the presentation of the security protocols, Callum noticed that Arden was making detailed notes, her hands moving precisely over the notebook. Her fingers had small calluses, marks of hard work that contrasted with the always flawless hands of the executives he used to meet. "Any questions?" she asked at the end of the presentation. "Yes," Arden raised his hand, his voice firm and clear. "The protocol mentions restricted access to the development sector after 6 p.m. As a night shift cleaner, I need to know if there is a specific procedure for these areas." The question showed attention to detail and concern for efficiency, qualities that Callum valued. "Excellent observation, Miss Martinez." "Arden Martinez. Ms. Martinez, you will be issued with a special badge for night access. Our head of security will arrange it later today." After the meeting, while the other employees left, Arden remained organizing his notes. Callum took the opportunity to take a closer look at her. She was dressed simply but impeccably. Basic black pants and a neat white blouse. Her dark hair was tied up in a practical bun, and she wore no makeup apart from a discreet lipstick. "Ms. Martinez," he called out, approaching, "your attention to security procedures is impressive." Arden looked up from her notes, and Callum saw a spark of distrust in her eyes. "Just doing my job, Mr. Richardson. Efficiency requires complete knowledge of the rules. Do you have any previous experience in technology companies?" "No," she replied, tucking the notebook into her handbag. "But I do have experience in keeping my eyes open and doing well what I set out to do." The direct answer, in the absence of any attempt to impress him, were refreshing. Callum was used to people going out of their way to please him, always with ulterior motives. "Well, I hope you find a suitable environment for your skills here at Richardson Tech," he said, keeping his tone professional, but feeling a growing curiosity about this woman who seemed immune to his influence. "Thank you, Mr. Richardson," Arden replied, standing up. "If you'll excuse me, I need to report to the supervisor to begin my practical training." As he watched her leave the room, Callum realized that, for the first time in a long time, someone had aroused his genuine interest. It wasn't just Arden's natural beauty, although she was undeniably attractive, but her independent attitude and unwavering dignity. Back in his office, Callum found himself thinking about his new employee. There was something about Arden Martinez that deeply intrigued him. Perhaps it was the fact that, In a world where he was used to having everything under control, she represented something unpredictable and authentic. Madison entered with the afternoon's agenda, interrupting his thoughts. "Mr. Richardson, your meeting with the investors starts in 15 minutes. Callum nodded, forcing himself to turn his attention back to business. But even as he reviewed the figures for the presentation, a part of his mind remained focused on the enigma that was Arden Martinez, the woman who had unwittingly penetrated his armor of indifference with nothing more than a direct look and a few honest words. In the week following their initial meeting, Callum found himself paying more attention to the cleaning crew's schedule. During his usual late nights at work, his eyes inevitably sought out Arden in the corridors of the building. She always maintained the same professional attitude, greeting him with a brief nod when their paths crossed. One evening, while reviewing contracts in his office, the soft sound of a cleaning trolley caught his attention. Arden entered the room, pausing momentarily when he realized his presence. "Good evening, Mr. Richardson. I can come back later if you prefer," she offered, her voice retaining that same firmness that had intrigued him on their first meeting. "There's no need," he replied, watching her begin her routine with precise, efficient movements. "How are you adapting to the job?" "Fine," replied Arden, as she methodically changed the garbage. "Your company has well-organized processes." Callum noticed that she was wearing a small earphone in one of her ears. "Studying something?" Arden hesitated for a moment, as if assessing how much she should reveal. "Business classes. I go to college during the day." This information piqued his interest even more. "Ambitious." "Realistic," she corrected, continuing her work. "In this world, we need to create our own opportunities." The comment struck Callum unexpectedly. He himself had started from scratch, although few knew this part of his story. The media preferred to portray him as just another tech prodigy who had lucked out. "Not everyone recognizes that," he commented, swiveling his chair to face her directly. "Most people expect opportunities to fall from the sky." "I don't have that luxury," Arden replied, moving to clean the windows. "I grew up watching my mother work 3 jobs to raise me on her own. I learned early on that nothing comes without effort." The silence that followed was filled only by the soft sound of the cloth against the glass. Callum watched her reflection in the window, noticing the concentration on her face even for a seemingly simple task. "You know," he began, "we have an internship program in the administration department." Arden stopped her movement, turning to face him. His eyes revealed a mixture of suspicion and interest. "Mr. Richardson, I appreciate the suggestion, but I prefer to earn my positions on my own merits, not for other reasons." The implication in his words was clear, and Callum felt a twinge of irritation. "I'm not offering favors, Miss Martinez, just informing you of a legitimate opportunity for the company." "Of course," she replied, getting back to work. "And I imagine you always personally inform the cleaning staff about internship opportunities at 11 o'clock at night." The direct answer caught him off guard, but also made him smile. It was refreshing to meet someone who wasn't intimidated by his position. "Touché," he admitted, "but my interest is purely professional. I recognize potential when I see it." "Mr. Richardson," Arden sighed, finishing organizing his cleaning materials. "I've only been working here for a week. You don't know me well enough to recognize any potential. And, with all due respect, I prefer to keep our relationship strictly professional." Before Callum could reply, Madison appeared at the door with some urgent documents. Arden took the opportunity to leave quietly, leaving behind only the faint scent of cleaning products and a sense of challenge in the air. In the days that followed, Callum found himself more frustrated than he would have liked to admit. He wasn't used to being dismissed so directly, least of all by a cleaning lady. But it was precisely this authenticity that attracted him to Arden. During a board meeting, while they were discussing the internal talent development program, Callum found himself thinking about how to create a genuine opportunity for someone like Arden, not out of personal interest, but because he recognized real value in her determination. "Mr. Richardson?" The voice of one of the directors brought him back to the present. "About the expansion of the internal scholarship program?" "Yes," he replied, an idea beginning to form. "I want a complete overhaul of the selection criteria. Let's open it up to all hierarchical levels of the company, without exception." The proposal generated a buzz in the meeting room. It was unusual for general service employees to be included in corporate development programs. "Are you sure?" asked the HR director. "That might create expectations." "Expectations are exactly what I want to create," interrupted Callum. "Talent is talent, regardless of the current position. Prepare the new notice by the end of the week." After the meeting, standing in front of his office window again, Callum reflected on his own motivations. Was he really creating a fair opportunity, or just trying to impress Arden? The answer wasn't simple, but he forced himself to be honest with himself. Maybe it was both. Madison entered with her updated agenda. "Mr. Richardson, I received an email from HR about the new scholarship program. Would you like me to prepare a special communication for the operational sectors?" "No," he replied, still looking out over the city. "Let them follow the standard procedure. No privileges, no exceptions." That evening, as Callum left the office late, he bumped into Arden in the elevator. She kept her eyes fixed on the metal doors, but he noticed that she was holding an advanced accounting book. "Good evening, Ms. Martinez," he said, maintaining a neutral tone. "Good evening, Mr. Richardson," she replied, equally formal. The silence that followed was fraught with unresolved tension. When the doors opened on the first floor, Arden came out first, her posture erect and determined. Callum watched her cross the lobby, realizing that there was something special about this woman, something that went far beyond the initial attraction he had felt. She was a living reminder of his own origins, of a time when he too had to fight for every opportunity. And perhaps, he thought, that was the real reason for his fascination. In Arden, he saw reflected the same strength that had propelled him to the top. Fall was arriving in Chicago with a cooler breeze and the soft yellowing of the leaves in the parks surrounding Richardson Tech inside the building. However, a silent tension grew among its air-conditioned corridors. 2 weeks after the announcement of the new scholarship program, the buzz among the staff was constant. Callum discreetly observed the reactions to the new program as he walked between floors. Some managers showed clear dissatisfaction with the idea of operational employees having the same opportunities as their administrative teams. Others, more progressive, saw the change as a necessary step forward. One particularly hectic morning, Madison walked into her office with a worried expression. "Mr. Richardson, there are some comments circulating about the motivations behind the new scholarship program." "What kind of comments?" he asked, already imagining the answer. "Well, some people are speculating about your particular interest in a specific member of the cleaning staff." Callum felt his jaw tighten. It was exactly the kind of situation Arden had foreseen and tried to avoid. "I see. Anything else?" "Director Thompson is requesting a meeting to discuss the selection criteria. He seems concerned about the impact on the company's image." "Schedule it for this afternoon," replied Callum, his voice maintaining a studied calm. "And Madison, please prepare a detailed report on similar programs in other Silicon Valley companies." That evening, after a series of tense meetings defending the new program, Callum remained in his office beyond the usual hours. It was no surprise when Arden showed up to clean up, her face revealing that she too was aware of the rumors. "Mr. Richardson," she began, her voice tenser than usual, "we need to talk." "I agree," he replied, gesturing to one of the chairs in front of his desk. "Please." Arden hesitated for a moment before sitting down, maintaining a rigid posture. "The comments about the scholarship program are affecting my work." "Arden," he began, noticing how his first name slipped out naturally. "The program has nothing to do with you specifically. It's a change that's been under consideration for some time." "With all due respect," she interrupted, "we both know that's not entirely true. And now, my colleagues treat me differently. Some with envy, others with disdain. As if you'd done something inappropriate to gain favor," he added, feeling a wave of guilt. "It wasn't my intention to create this situation." "Your intentions don't matter much now, do they?" she replied, running her hand over her face in a rare moment of vulnerability. "I work here to pay for my college and support my sick mother. I can't afford to lose this job because of corporate gossip." The mention of his sick mother took Callum by surprise. It was one more detail of her life that he didn't know, one more reason for his determination. "Nobody's going to lose their job," he assured her. "And if anyone is making your working environment hostile, That will be dealt with appropriately. Don't you understand? Arden stood up, frustration evident in his voice. I don't want special treatment. I don't want to be protected. I just want to do my job in peace and get my own way. Callum stood up too, feeling an inexplicable need to explain himself. The program is legitimate, Arden. It's a real opportunity for talented people who would normally be ignored by the corporate system. People like you, yes, but not just you. And why has it become so important now? She asked, her eyes fixed on his. Why just when I started working here? The silence that followed was heavy. Callum knew that any answer would sound like an excuse. The truth was that Arden had been a catalyst, making him question practices he had long accepted without thinking. Maybe, he began, choosing his words carefully, you've reminded me of something I'd forgotten, of what it's like to be on the other side, fighting for a chance. Arden studied him for a moment, as if trying to decipher his sincerity. You don't know me, Mr. Richardson. Not really. A few late-night conversations aren't enough to understand who I am or what I'm capable of. Then let me get to know you. The words came out before he could stop them. Not as your boss, not with ulterior motives, just as someone who respects your determination and wants to understand your perspective. For a brief moment, something flashed through Arden's eyes, a mixture of surprise and something else, something she quickly suppressed. I can't, she replied, moving towards the door. There are boundaries that need to be maintained. Please respect that. As she left, Callum stood still, feeling the weight of his own contradictions. As CEO, his decisions affected thousands of lives. As a man, he was struggling to understand his own motives in relation to a single person. Madison entered a few minutes later with more documents about the scholarship program. Mr. Richardson, the data you requested. Thank you, Madison, he replied, returning to his desk. Please schedule a general meeting for tomorrow. I'll personally clarify a few points about the new program. As he organized his thoughts for the next day, Callum realized that he was in uncharted territory. For the first time in years, his actions were not only guided by business logic, but by something deeper and less controllable, and that, more than anything else, scared him. A week after the tense conversation in his office, Callum found himself immersed in a different routine. His mornings, once dedicated exclusively to reports and meetings, now included discrete observations about the new scholarship program. Applications had begun, and the buzz in the corridors of Richardson Tech was palpable. During a morning meeting with Madison, he noticed unusual movement in the HR department through the glass walls of his office. Is there a problem with the applications? Actually, Madison consulted her tablet. We've had a surprising number of applications from operational staff, including one you might be interested in. Callum felt his heart speed up slightly. Did Arden apply? No, replied Madison, watching her boss's reaction carefully. And according to Janet from HR, she was quite emphatic in making it clear that she wouldn't be taking part. The news hit him unexpectedly. Part of him admired Arden's integrity even more, while another part was frustrated by her stubbornness. That evening, against his better judgment, Callum decided to stay late at the office. When Arden showed up to clean up, he couldn't contain his curiosity. Why didn't you sign up for the program? He asked directly, surprising her. Arden stopped his work, sighing deeply. Mr. Richardson, I thought we'd cleared that up. No, you expressed your concerns about rumors. The program is legitimate, applications are anonymous in the first phase, and you're wasting a real opportunity. Maybe, she replied, moving to clear the shelves. I have other plans. What plans? With all due respect, that's none of your business, she replied, but then softened her tone. Look, I know you mean well, but I need to do things my way. Just then, Arden's phone vibrated. She checked it quickly, and Callum noticed how her face paled slightly. Is everything all right? He asked, genuinely concerned. I have to go, she replied, hastily starting to put her materials away. Family emergency. Can I help you in any way? No, came the quick, firm reply. Please, I have to go. Before she could leave, Callum called out to her. Arden, wait, at least let me call a driver for you. She hesitated at the door, visibly torn between her need for independence and the urgency of the situation. All right, she finally agreed. Thank you. As they waited for the driver in the lobby, Callum noticed how vulnerable Arden looked for the first time since he had met her. Her hands were shaking slightly as she typed messages into her cell phone. "Is that your mother?" he asked softly. Arden nodded, keeping his eyes fixed on the cell phone screen. "She's had a relapse. I need to take her to the hospital." "Which hospital?" "Northwestern Memorial," she answered automatically, then realized she had shared more than she had intended. "Please don't. I won't show up there," he assured her. "But I'll ask the driver to wait and take you home afterwards." "Mr. Richardson, Callum," he corrected. "And that's no favor or charity. It's just one human being helping another at a difficult time." The car arrived, and before Arden got in, his eyes met Callum's. For a brief moment, all the barriers she had built up seemed to crumble. "Thank you, Callum," she said softly, before getting into the vehicle. Over the next few hours, Callum tried to concentrate on his work, but his thoughts kept returning to Arden and his mother. At around 2 in the morning, he received a message from the driver confirming that they were both safe at home. The next morning, during his usual executive meeting, Callum found himself thinking about how the corporate healthcare system could be more inclusive. As the benefits director began his quarterly presentation, he interrupted him. "I want a complete overhaul of our benefits policy for outsourced employees," he announced, "including extensive medical coverage for dependents." The room was silent for a moment, until Thompson, the same director who had questioned the scholarship program, snorted. "Mr. Richardson, that would represent a significant increase in operating costs. And how much does it cost the company to lose qualified employees because they have to choose between working and looking after their families?" said Callum. "Prepare a proposal by the end of the week." After the meeting, Madison met him in his office with a worried expression. "The directors are questioning your recent decisions," she said carefully. "They think you're too emotionally involved." Callum allowed himself a moment's reflection before replying. "Maybe I am, Madison, but sometimes we need an emotional catalyst to see what's always been wrong right before our eyes." That evening, when Arden returned to work, there was something different about her posture, a mixture of gratitude and discomfort. "Is your mother better?" he asked softly. "Yes," she replied, adjusting her cleaning trolley. "And thank you for yesterday." "No need to thank me," he said, keeping a respectful distance. "As you said, we're only human beings." A small smile appeared on Arden's lips, the first he'd ever seen. "Still, it was kind of you." The silence that followed was different from the previous ones, less tense, more understanding. Something had changed between them. A barrier had become a little more transparent, even if it was still there. "You know," she began, surprising him by continuing the conversation, "when you took over the company 5 years ago, my mother worked here in cleaning too." This information took Callum by surprise. "I didn't know. She retired on disability last year," Arden continued. "That's why I came to work here. I knew the environment, the hours. It made it easier to look after her." Callum felt the weight of this revelation, understanding better the complexity of Arden's situation and her initial resistance to him. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked softly. Arden stopped his work, looking directly at him. "Because yesterday you didn't act like the CEO of Richardson Tech. You acted like someone who cares. And that makes a difference." The change in the dynamic between Callum and Arden was subtle, but noticeable in the days following the incident with his mother. The nightly greetings became less tense, and occasionally, Arden allowed himself brief moments of conversation while carrying out his tasks. One particularly quiet evening, Callum found a small envelope on his desk. Inside was a simple card with a handwritten message. "Health insurance has made a difference. Thank you for caring. A.M." The unexpected gesture caught him off guard, making him smile involuntarily. Madison, who was entering with the next day's agenda, noticed the change in her boss's countenance. "Good news?" she asked quietly. "Just confirmation that some changes are worthwhile," he replied, carefully putting the card away in his drawer. That same week, during one of his evening walks around the building, Callum met Arden in the cafeteria on the 35th floor. She was sitting alone, studying during her break, a cup of coffee already cold beside her. "May I join you?" he asked, keeping a respectful distance. Arden hesitated for a moment before nodding. Of course, he replied, moving some books to free up space on the table. Advanced accounting, he observed, noting the titles of the books. Do you intend to specialize in corporate finance? Actually, she began, closing the book, I want to open my own business someday. A cleaning service company, but different from the others. One that treats its employees with dignity. The revelation surprised Callum. Is that why you didn't sign up for the scholarship program? You already have your own plan. Partly, she admitted, but also because, she paused, as if choosing her words carefully, because I didn't want people to think I was using our situation to my advantage. What situation would that be? He asked softly. Arden stared directly at him, a slight blush coloring his cheeks. You know very well, Mr. Richardson. Callum, he corrected again. And yes, I know there's something here. Something we've both been trying to ignore. The silence that followed was fraught with unresolved tension. Arden played nervously with the edge of her book, while Callum watched her, allowing himself, for the first time, to fully admit the depth of his feelings for her. It can't work, she finally said, her voice almost a whisper. We're from too many different worlds. Worlds can meet, he replied, and sometimes the differences are exactly what makes something special. Easy for you to say, Arden let out a frustrated sigh. You're not the one who has to listen to the comments in the corridors, the looks from people, the innuendos. What if I didn't care about any of that? Interrupted Callum, leaning slightly on the table. What if you were willing to face any consequences? But I do care, she replied, starting to put her materials away. I have goals, dreams that I've built up with a lot of effort. I can't risk everything for something I don't even know is real. Before she could get up, Callum gently took her hand. The contact, however brief, sent an electric current through them both. It's real for me, Arden. More real than anything I've felt in a long time. Arden looked at their joined hands, and for a moment, Callum saw his defenses falter. It's real for me too, she admitted softly, and that scares me more than anything else. The moment was interrupted by the sound of Arden's phone. It was time to get back to work. She withdrew her hand gently, collecting her things. I have to go, she said, but there was a new softness in her voice. Have dinner with me, Callum suddenly proposed. Out of here, away from the stares and comments. Just two people really getting to know each other. Arden stopped in the doorway of the cafe, turning to face him. It wouldn't be appropriate. Since when has propriety brought anyone happiness? He asked, standing up. One night, Arden. No pressure, no expectations. Just a chance to find out if what we feel is worth exploring. She studied him for a long moment, and Callum could see the conflict in her eyes, desire fighting against prudence, heart against reason. Dinner, she finally agreed, but on two conditions. Which? First, it has to be somewhere discreet, away from the spotlight. And second, she paused, a small smile playing on her lips. You have to promise me that, whatever happens, my job and my reputation here will be safe. You have my word, he replied solemnly. On both counts. When Arden finally left the cafe, Callum stood there for a moment, absorbing what had just happened. It was the first time in years that he had felt truly nervous about a date, like a teenager about to go out with his first crush. Madison found him still smiling when she returned to her office. They always talk about your tech empire as if I'd been born in a golden cradle, he added, a wry smile on his lips. The media prefers simple stories. The truth is always more complicated. The waiter returned to take their orders, and when he left, a comfortable silence settled between them. Arden watched Callum with new eyes, noticing layers he had never imagined existed. Why don't you ever talk about it? She asked, genuinely intrigued. Why don't you talk about your entrepreneurial dreams? He replied softly. Sometimes we keep certain parts of ourselves protected because it's safer that way. Touché, admitted Arden, a small smile playing on her lips. But I still think there's a difference between us. You've made it. I'm still trying. And that's exactly why you fascinate me, said Callum, leaning slightly on the table. You remind me of something I'd almost forgotten: the hunger for achievement, the sheer determination, no cynicism. The wine arrived, and while Callum tasted and approved the bottle, Arden studied him intently. There was a vulnerability in his gestures tonight, something that never came through in a corporate environment. "What was your mother like?" she asked suddenly, surprising them both with the intimacy of the question. Callum's face softened at the memory. Strong, stubborn, raised 3 children on her own working as a nurse, passed away 5 years ago, just before Richardson Tech really took off. "I'm sorry," said Arden softly, better understanding her reaction to the episode with her own mother. "She would have liked you," he continued, pouring wine for them both. "She always said she could judge someone's character by the way they treated people who couldn't offer them anything in return." The main courses arrived, momentarily interrupting the conversation. The aroma of fresh pasta and homemade sauce filled the air between them. "What about your brothers?" asked Arden, resuming the conversation. "Mike is a professor in Boston. Sarah works in sustainable development in California," he replied. "We see each other on holidays, when we manage to juggle our schedules." As the evening progressed, the barriers between CEO and employee, between different social classes, seemed to fade. They were just 2 people sharing stories, fears, and dreams. "Tell me about your business plan," Callum asked, as they savored dessert, an artisanal tiramisu that melted in the mouth. Arden hesitated at first, but something in the way he looked at her with genuine interest and respect made her open up. "I want to create a company that values its employees, that offers training, a career plan, real benefits. Most cleaning companies treat their employees as disposable. Like your mother was treated," he added softly. "Yes," she admitted. "I saw how hard she worked, how dedicated she was, and how easily she was replaced when she got sick. Nobody deserves that." "It's a noble goal," said Callum, "and completely achievable with the right plan." "Are you offering free consultancy now?" she joked, but there was genuine curiosity in her tone. "I'm offering support," he corrected, "as someone who believes in your potential, not as your boss or anything else we might be." The moment was interrupted by the soft ring of Arden's cell phone. It was the alarm she had set so she wouldn't miss the last bus. "I have to go," she said, starting to get up. "Let me take you," Callum offered. "I promise it'll be a strictly professional ride." Arden laughed, a light, genuine sound that made Callum's heart race. "Nothing about tonight has been strictly professional, Mr. Richardson." "No," he agreed, smiling. "And that's what makes it special." On the way home, in their luxurious but discreet car, they chatted about simple things: music, movies, favorite books. When they arrived at the modest building where Arden lived, Callum realized he didn't want the evening to end. "Thanks for dinner," she said, getting ready to leave. It was revealing. "Can we do it again?" he ventured, trying to keep his tone casual. Arden studied him for a moment, her face partially illuminated by the streetlight. "Maybe," she finally replied, "but we need to be careful. There's a lot at stake." "I know," he agreed, "and I promise to respect your space and your decisions." Before getting out of the car, Arden did something that surprised them both. He leaned over and lightly kissed Callum's cheek. "Good night, Callum." As he watched her enter the building, Callum touched the spot of the kiss, feeling both electric and at peace. Something had definitely changed that night. Barriers had fallen, truths had been shared, and a new path was beginning to take shape, still uncertain, but full of possibilities. The days following the dinner brought a new dynamic to Richardson Tech. Although Callum and Arden kept a professional distance in public, there was a different energy in the air, a subtle tension that only the most observant could notice. Madison, always on the lookout, noticed the small changes in her boss's behavior: the discreet smiles when he checked his cell phone messages, the more frequent walks down the corridors on the night shift. One particularly hectic morning, Thompson walked unannounced into Callum's office, carrying a thick briefcase under his arm. "We need to talk about the new benefits programs," he announced, his expression more serious than usual. "The board is concerned about the direction the company is taking." Callum looked up from the documents he was reviewing. "Sit down, Thompson. What exactly is the board's concern?" "Really? They think you're losing focus," replied Thompson, opening his briefcase. "First the scholarship program, now this expansion of benefits for contractors. Operating costs have risen significantly in the last quarter." "What about productivity rates?" asked Callum, keeping his cool. Have you analyzed the turnover figures since we implemented the changes? Thompson hesitated. Well, there's been a reduction in voluntary redundancies, and employee satisfaction indicators have improved, but the board is more concerned with immediate profits than long-term sustainability, added Callum, getting up to look out of the window. Do you know how much it used to cost to train new staff every 3 months? How much we were losing in productivity with constantly understaffed teams? Thompson's silence was eloquent. Callum continued. My mother used to say that the true cost of a business is not in the red numbers, but in the tired faces of the employees who sustain the company. Callum, Thompson softened his tone. I understand your point of view, but there are rumors about your motivations for these changes. About a certain employee. Stop, interrupted Callum, his voice as sharp as a blade. If the council has concerns about my administrative decisions, let them be presented with hard data, not with hallway gossip. At that moment, Madison quietly entered with an urgent message. Arden's mother had been hospitalized again. Thompson, we'll continue this conversation later, said Callum, reaching for his jacket. Madison, cancel my afternoon appointments. At Northwestern Memorial Hospital, Callum found Arden in the waiting room, looking exhausted and vulnerable. When she saw him, her eyes filled with restrained tears. You didn't have to come, she said, but her voice betrayed her relief at seeing him. Yes, I did, he replied, taking a seat next to her. How is she? Stable now. Arden ran his hands over his face. But the doctors want to do more tests. The basic plan doesn't cover all the procedures, and I don't know how. Arden, Callum interrupted her gently. Let me help. Not as your boss, not as whatever we are. Just as someone who cares. I can't accept that, she shook her head. There are already enough rumors in the company. If they find out, that they would, he replied firmly. I'm tired of worrying about what other people think. You've reminded me why I started Richardson Tech. It wasn't to please shareholders. It was to make a difference to people's lives. Arden studied him for a long moment, as if seeing him for the first time. Why have you changed so much? Since we met. I haven't changed, he corrected softly. I've just gone back to who I was. You reminded me of the boy who fixed cars and dreamed of building something meaningful. A doctor approached, interrupting the moment. After a brief conversation about Mrs. Martinez's condition, Callum discreetly assured her that all the necessary procedures would be carried out, regardless of coverage. Hours later, with Arden's mother finally stabilized and resting, they walked through the hospital garden. The late afternoon sun painted the sky in golden hues, creating an almost surreal atmosphere. I need to tell you something, said Arden, stopping next to a bench. Remember when I mentioned that my mother worked at Richardson Tech? Callum nodded, sensing that something important was coming. She was one of the employees laid off during the restructuring 5 years ago, Arden continued. That's why her health began to decline, losing her job and her health insurance. The revelation hit Callum like a punch in the gut. That restructuring had been one of his first big decisions as CEO, a decision purely based on numbers, without considering the lives affected. Why did you agree to work for me, knowing that? He asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. Because I needed the job, she answered honestly. And because I saw a chance to understand, to see up close the man who made that decision. And what did you see? He asked, dreading the answer. I saw someone who has lost his way for a while, but who still has a heart, she replied, gently touching his face. Someone who was trying to make things right now, even if it's late. Her touch was like electricity on his skin. Callum closed his eyes, absorbing the moment and the weight of her revelations. I'm sorry, he said at last. For your mother, for all the families I've affected. I was so focused on building an empire that I forgot why I started. The important thing is that you remembered, Arden replied, and you're doing something about it. When their gazes met again, something had changed. The last barriers between them seemed to have crumbled, revealing a connection deeper than social position or corporate hierarchy. I can't change the past, said Callum, but I can try to right the wrongs from the present onwards, starting with making sure that no other employee goes through what your mother went through. Arden smiled gently, and in that smile Callum saw forgiveness. understanding, and something more, something that made his heart beat stronger and his determination to be a better person grow even stronger. The news spread through Richardson Tech like fire through dry straw. The benefits program would be extended retroactively, covering employees who had been laid off in the last 5 years during the restructuring. The decision, announced at a special board meeting, sent shockwaves through the Chicago corporate market. Thompson was livid when he walked into Callum's office that October morning. "Have you completely lost your mind? The shareholders are panicking." "The shareholders will survive," Callum replied calmly, without taking his eyes off his computer screen where he was going over the details of the new program. "And if they don't, they may not be the partners we need for the future of the company." "This is about her, isn't it?" asked Thompson, his voice laced with accusation. "With the cleaner and her mother?" Callum finally looked up, his gaze as sharp as a blade. "It's about doing the right thing, Thompson. Something we should have done a long time ago." Later that same day, Arden met him in the company's terrace garden, a place she normally cleaned, but which now served as neutral territory for their discreet encounters. "You didn't have to do that," she said, taking a seat next to him on the wooden bench. "Especially not because of me." "I didn't do it for you," he replied, watching the sun set over the city. "I did it for all your mothers who sacrificed years of their lives for this company and were discarded like numbers on a spreadsheet." Arden studied his profile for a moment, noticing the small changes in his expression, the determination in his eyes, the softening of his worry lines. "You know this is going to have consequences, don't you? For you, for the company?" "It already has," he confirmed, a small smile playing on his lips. "The shares are down 3% today. Thompson is having a fit. The board wants an emergency meeting. And you're not worried?" "I'm more worried about what would happen if I did nothing," he replied, turning to face her. "You've reminded me of something important, Arden. Success isn't just measured in numbers." The soft autumn wind played with a loose strand of her hair, and Callum resisted the urge to tousle it. Even there, alone, they kept a respectful distance, more by her choice than his. "My mother asked about you," said Arden softly. "She doesn't know who you really are, but she noticed your visits to the hospital." "And what did you tell her?" "That you're someone who's trying to make up for your mistakes," she replied, her eyes meeting his. "Someone who is learning to see beyond appearances." The next day, Richardson Tech was buzzing with even more rumors. Madison walked into Callum's office carrying a stack of newspapers, all highlighting the company's revolutionary decision and speculating on its motivations. "The Wall Street Journal wants an exclusive interview," she informed him. "And there are at least 3 articles suggesting you're having a nervous breakdown or a midlife crisis." Callum laughed, picking up one of the newspapers. "Let them speculate. Sometimes it takes a crisis to see what really matters." "And what really matters?" asked Madison, allowing herself a moment of personal curiosity. "Making a difference," he replied, looking through the window at the employees moving through the corridors below. "Not just talk about it in annual reports." That evening, when Arden arrived for his shift, he found an envelope in his locker in the changing room. Inside was an official letter from Richardson Tech, offering her a full scholarship to complete her studies, with no obligation to stay with the company afterwards. Her heart racing, she went up to Callum's office. He was waiting for her, as if he knew she was coming. "I can't accept it," she said, putting the envelope on his desk. "Not like this." "Why?" he asked simply. "You applied for the program like any other employee. You were assessed by the same criteria. You went through all the stages. But people will always think something, Arden," he interrupted softly. "The question is, are you going to let that define your choices?" She hesitated, her hands still on the envelope. "Why do you do that? Why do you care so much?" Callum stood up, edging around the table to be closer to her, but still keeping a respectful distance. "Because you showed me that there was still good in me when I had forgotten it myself. Because you made me question every decision I made based solely on numbers. Because—" "Don't say it," she asked softly, taking a step back. "Please don't make this any more complicated than it already is." "It's already complicated," he replied. "It has been since day one. But that doesn't mean it's not real, that it's not important." The silence that followed was laden with unspoken words, contained feelings, unexplored possibilities. Finally, Arden picked up the envelope again. "I'll think about the grant," she said, her voice firmer. "But I need you to understand one thing. If I accept, it will be for me. Not for you, not for us, not for anything that may or may not happen between us." "I wouldn't expect anything different," he replied, a genuine smile lighting up his face. "That's exactly why you deserve this chance." When she left the office, Callum stood for a long moment, watching the city through the windows. The lights of Chicago twinkled like earthly stars, reminding him of all the lives his decisions affected for better or worse. At his desk, the phone rang. It was Thompson, probably with more news about the reaction of the shareholders. But for the first time in a long time, Callum didn't care about the numbers. He had found something more valuable than profits and margins. He had found his purpose again. Fall in Chicago had arrived in full swing, dyeing the trees in Millennium Park in shades of red and gold. From the window of his office at Richardson Tech, Callum watched the landscape transform, reflecting on the changes that the last few months had brought not just to the company, but to his own life. The board meeting was scheduled for that afternoon, and rumors about a possible vote to remove him as CEO were circulating in the corridors. Madison entered with her usual discretion, carrying a folder of reports. "The third quarter figures are in," she announced. "And they're surprising." Callum picked up the documents, his eyes quickly scanning the pages. A small smile formed on his lips. "Send copies to all the council members immediately." "I've already done that," Madison replied, allowing herself a complicit smile. "Thompson is having trouble processing the information." The numbers were unequivocal. After the implementation of the new benefits programs and the retroactive extension of medical coverage, employee turnover had dropped dramatically. Productivity had increased by 23%, and employee satisfaction was at record levels. "Sometimes doing the right thing is also doing the right business," muttered Callum, more to himself than to Madison. That same morning, Arden had left an envelope on his desk, his formal response to the scholarship program. Callum hadn't yet had the courage to open it, fearing either acceptance or rejection, each possibility carrying its own complications. The phone rang. It was Thompson, sounding unusually conciliatory. "The shareholders have seen the figures," he said without preamble. "They want to postpone the board meeting to re-evaluate some positions." "The meeting takes place today, as scheduled," Callum replied firmly. "I have some additional proposals to present." After hanging up, Callum finally opened Arden's envelope. His firm, clear handwriting filled just a few lines. "I accept the scholarship on one condition. I must stay away from Richardson Tech during my studies. I can't build my future on rumors and speculation. I hope you understand." Arden, the impact of the words hit him hard. It was a sensible, professional decision, completely in line with everything he knew about her, and yet, it hurt more than he expected. Madison returned with more updates. "The press are in the lobby. Apparently, someone leaked information about the quarter's results. They're calling Richardson Tech the new model of conscious capitalism. Schedule a press conference for tomorrow," Callum instructed. "It's time for us to take on the narrative." In the afternoon, while preparing for the board meeting, Callum received an unexpected visit. Arden's mother, Mrs. Martinez, was in her office, leaning on a cane but with a determined look that was very reminiscent of her daughter. "Mr. Richardson," she began, politely declining the invitation to sit down, "I've come to thank you personally for what you've done for me and the other ex-employees. But most of all, I've come to talk to you about my daughter." Callum felt his heart race. "Mrs. Martinez, please let me finish," she interrupted gently. "I know my daughter. I know how hard she fights to prove herself, to achieve everything on her own merits. And I also know how to recognize when someone looks at her the way you do." "I respect your daughter very much," Callum replied carefully. "Yes, that goes without saying," smiled Mrs. Martinez. "But you also love her, and that scares her more than anything else." The frankness of the statement caught him off guard. "How? Mothers know these things," she replied simply. "And Arden is just like I was at her age, too proud to accept help, too determined to admit her own feelings." Before Callum could reply, Madison announced that the council was assembled and awaiting their presence. Mrs. Martinez headed for the door, but paused for a moment. "Sometimes," she said softly, The greatest act of love is to give someone room to grow, even if it means being away for a while. The board meeting was intense, but less hostile than expected. The numbers spoke for themselves, and even the most skeptical directors had to admit that the changes implemented were bringing positive results. What I propose now, Callum concluded his presentation, is to expand the grants and benefits program to all our branches, not as a charitable measure, but as a strategic investment in our human capital. When the vote was concluded, approval was unanimous, something rare in Richardson Tech's history. Thompson was the first to approach him after the meeting. "You've changed," he said, a mixture of admiration and confusion in his voice. "In all these years working together, I've never seen you so human." "Maybe I just remembered who I was," Callum replied, thinking of Arden. That evening, alone in his office, Callum drafted his reply to Arden's letter. "I accept your condition. You deserve to make your way without shadows or doubts. The scholarship is guaranteed, without ties or expectations. As for the rest, time will tell. I'll be here, not as your boss or benefactor, but as someone who believes in you, in your potential. Always." Callum, when he had finished writing, he took another look at the city that stretched out beyond the windows of his office. Chicago seemed different now, more alive, more real. Or perhaps it was he who was seeing everything with new eyes, the eyes of someone who had rediscovered not only his professional purpose, but also his capacity to feel, to care, to love. The transformation of Richardson Tech would continue, as would his own personal transformation, and although the future with Arden was uncertain, Callum knew that some stories needed time to develop fully, like the fall that painted the city outside, changing everything gradually but inexorably. Spring arrived in Chicago with a promise of renewal. 6 months had passed since Arden had left Richardson Tech to devote himself fully to his studies. During this time, the company had transformed significantly under Callum's new vision, becoming a model of humanized management in the corporate world. In his office, Callum was reviewing the first quarter reports when Madison walked in with a business magazine. On the cover, a photo of him next to the headline, "The Silent Revolution: How Richardson Tech is Changing the Corporate Paradigm." "I think you'll want to see page 27, said Madison with a discreet smile. The page featured an article on social entrepreneurship, and among the cases highlighted was a family project, Martinez Cleaning Services, a new approach to corporate cleaning services. The photo showed Arden next to her mother, both smiling in front of a small office. "She's done it," murmured Callum, a mixture of pride and longing in his voice. "There's more," Madison continued. "Her company is bidding on our tender to outsource the cleaning services for the Western branches." Callum looked up, surprised. She registered her company for the process? With all the necessary documentation, following every protocol. Thompson has already reviewed the proposal apparently. It's one of the most solid we've received. Callum's heart raced slightly. In 6 months, they hadn't exchanged more than a few formal messages about the scholarship. He had respected her request for space, even though every day brought with it the temptation to seek her out. "Schedule a meeting with all the candidates," he instructed, "and Madison, make sure the process is completely transparent." "As everyone has been since you changed the hiring policies," she replied with a knowing smile. The following week, the meeting room on the 50th floor was occupied by representatives from various service companies. When Arden entered, wearing a professional suit and carrying a presentation folder, Callum felt as if the air had changed in the room. Their gazes met briefly, his conveying restrained pride, hers a mixture of determination and something deeper, unspoken. Arden had changed. She was more confident, more self-assured, like someone who had finally found her place in the world. During her presentation, she demonstrated an in-depth knowledge of the sector, proposing innovations in people management and sustainability. Her proposal included career plans for operational employees and a professional qualification program. "Our mission," she concluded, "is to dignify cleaning work, transforming it from an invisible service into a respected and valued career." After all the presentations, Thompson approached Callum. "Martinez Cleaning Services' proposal is impressive," he admitted, "but some directors are worried about, well, the fact that she was our employee?" Callum asked. "Or with our personal history?" "Both," replied Thompson honestly. Then I suggest you go over the figures again, said Callum firmly, and see for yourselves why she deserves to win this bid on her own merits, not in spite of or because of anything else. That evening, as the last of the staff left the building, Callum met Arden in the roof garden, his old meeting place. "Congratulations on the presentation," he said, keeping a respectful distance. "You've built something remarkable." "I've learned from the best," she replied, a small smile playing on her lips. "Your changes at Richardson Tech served as inspiration for my business model." "How's your mother?" "Much better. In fact, she's my training director now. There's no one better to teach about work than someone who knows it deeply." The silence that followed was full of unspoken words, of feelings that had matured over the months of separation. "I missed you," Callum finally admitted, "but I understood why you needed the space." "I missed you too," Arden replied softly, "but I needed to prove to myself that I could do it on my own." "And you did," he smiled. "More than that, you're changing lives, just as you changed mine." Arden took a step towards him, breaking the formal distance they had kept. "You've changed my life too, Callum. You've made me see that it's possible to be successful without losing your humanity." "So, what happens now?" he asked, his heart racing at her closeness. "Now," Arden replied with a confident smile, "we're two entrepreneurs who share a similar worldview. No longer boss and employee, no longer benefactor and beneficiary. Just us." "Just us," he repeated, allowing himself to smile. "I like the sound of that." The following week, Martinez Cleaning Services was announced as the successful bidder unanimously by the evaluation committee. The news was greeted with general approval, especially after the detailed disclosure of the evaluation criteria in the transparency of the process. In his office, Callum found a new card on his desk. Inside, Arden's familiar handwriting. "Dinner tonight? I know a little Italian restaurant where we can just be ourselves." As the city prepared for another night, Callum watched Chicago through his window with new eyes. Richardson Tech had transformed, and so had he. And now, finally, he was ready for a new story, one that would begin not with power or position, but with two people who had found their true value through each other. Madison entered with her updated agenda. "Last meeting canceled," she informed him with a discreet smile. "You're free for the rest of the evening." "Thanks, Madison," Callum replied, picking up his jacket. "I think it's time for a fresh start."